This is the first part of number 5. I have done 4 films, which is here at Grace's house and Cal's house. We have 8 hours of film that we have already done. I'll also have 1 extra hour that was done by Bill Crooney of Fairbury. And tonight, we expect this to be the last one, at least for a while. I do have some singles that I've got to pick up, which will be at their own place or at my place. And but anyway, my name's Wren Trosper, and we're going to start out here with Lou, and just give your name, and we'll go from there.
I'm Lelia Haussler, Wren's wife, and I've been in on several of these meetings.
I'm Lelia Haussler. My maiden name was McCoy, and I've lived in the area all my life.
My name's Cathy Weber. My maiden name was Cox, and I've lived here most of my life with the exception of about 20 years when I lived in Lincoln and went to school down there, and then married later and came out here.
Cal Parr, lived in Arapahoe all my life. Might as well say anyway. Was in the service, but then not for very long.
I'm Grace Fall. I'm an import from Crete, Nebraska.
Okay, just have at it. Whatever somebody gets started. I'm going to have you move in just a little closer to the table because I can't get you all in there. The outsiders here anyway.
Me too.
Yeah,
Is that better?
that's better. Grace could come in just a little.
I don't want to hide Cal.
Go ahead.
He's the,
Okay.
all right.
Okay, somebody get started onto it and we'll go from there.
I'll start out with something about my family. The McCoys moved from Trumbull out to a farm west of the golf course in 1904. My dad was Stacy B. McCoy, and he was the third son, or the second son, the third child of James Oliver McCoy and Lucetta Pine. And the McCoy, he grew up out there and went to Garfield School, which was across the road south from the country club. My mother grew up in Gosper County and was the daughter of Erastus R. and Jerusha Thomas. And my dad farmed and auctioned and was a jack of all trades, I guess. At one time he sold easy washing machines, which were electric or gas motors. And he liked to trade cows and horses and all kinds of things, but he always wanted to be an auctioneer. And his dad discouraged him. He didn't think he could make a living at it. But as a little girl, I can remember riding on the Lister. He had a box, and I would ride in that box. And he auctioned the fence posts and the horses and the cattle and everyone. And that was before he really got started.
That was his education.
How nice.
He started with Colonel Sutton from Henley and worked with him, and then had his own business then later. And when they moved to Arapahoe in 1939, after I had graduated from Beaver City High School, they lived down where Neil McCoy lives, south of the tracks. And I can't remember whose place that had been, but he got into the real estate business. He got his real estate license, and from there was busy. He moved lots of houses into town. I wish I knew how many. More than 50, I know. But at that time, the farmers were was after the hard times and depression, and lots of the farmers were selling out and moving west, and many of those houses on the farms were sold and moved into town. I had two brothers, Leon and James Doran, Jake, and a sister, Lucetta Andrews.
And your kids?
Well, my children, I have three sons. Les Haussler and I were married August the 9th in 1941. Our first son was born September 22nd, 1942, and he's Lester L. Went by Butch to family members for a lot of years. And second son, Danny Lee, was born October 18th, 1944, and Dee was born October 15th, 1945. I was going to have one child, it was going to be a girl. The good Lord had other plans.
Well, you did a good job. There's three fine boys.
Thank you.
They are.
Well, am I supposed to take up where you left off? I was born here in Arapahoe. The Cox family came to Arapahoe in the early 1900s. My grandfather purchased the Arapahoe Public Mayor at that time. Charlie Blauvelt, I think, I'm not sure, the man who was the publisher. And then the papers was owned until my dad died, and 10 years thereafter, and my mother ran it. So newspapering ran in the Cox family for many generations. My dad always said they were kooks and inventors. When I went to Chicago when I was a kid, Dad sent me to the Chicago Tribune because everything you use every day, guys, my ancestor invented. That's the machine that folds the newspapers. It was invented by a Cox, and so I had to go to the Chicago Tribune to see this. But like Dad said, they were all thought of funny, and that's the way they made their money, was by inventions and stuff. And printers, all had to do with the printing industry. Both my families, my mother's family, she was a Hasty, born and raised here, and my dad was born, I think, in Sioux City, Iowa, or up there somewhere, and he spent most of his life here in that, except for a time we lived in Lincoln, and he went into Nebraska politics about the time of Governor Griswold, which happens pretty common to newspaper people. So all my life I spent here. Well, let's see what I can tell you. The Cox family and the Hasty family, on both sides of my family, I've discovered through my genealogy work, both came before the American Revolution. So I have a lot of history that's been fun to go back and see what these people did after they came to this country. And I used to be interested in my dad's stuff, and my mother would say, well, don't pay any attention to those Coxes, the Hasties are just as interesting. And I have to tell you, yesterday I found a box that belonged to my mother, and she's been dead a good many years, that I had never opened. And inside it I found a very valuable notebook with letters from 1840 something, some of them, Civil War letters that were written by some of the Hasty family, and they're just great. Mother put them in sleeves, you know, and they're all in there. Yeah, I had more fun. That's kind of interesting.
You read them to Mel, or Mel read them?
No, no, he's not interested in much reading right now.
Okay, I wonder.
Yeah. Let's see, we had my brother, there were two in the Cox family. My brother, who is now deceased, was 4 years older than I, and myself, just the two children. And neither of us were ever interested in the printing business, so when my mother decided to give it up, you know, they went to offset printing. I don't know if you know the difference from where you ran things through a press and made an impression on a picture. Now they do it by photography, and when this is called offset printing. And when it would have cost a lot of money, and Mother wasn't interested in getting into it. It wasn't her thing. She was a printer, and so she decided and it was time to retire. So
Gosh,
sold the business.
Who used to make all those old lead things and for the paper.
That's what you call a linotype machine. Yeah, it was all made with lead and, yeah, you type just like a typewriter. And you typed a little slot, a little piece of metal, and for each line of type that you read
Yeah,
in a column. And then you made up a whole column on this machine. Then you put those columns together and flat, then you put them on a flat bed press, and you rolled the paper over and ran the paper through there. That's how that worked. But that's a flatbed press, which was the older type, and nobody does that anymore.
oh,
That's all gone.
Sarah Walker ran that linotype for a good many years.
Yeah.
I worked for Jenny and Ralph for 2 years,
Mhm.
wrote news and worked in the office.
Yeah. So I kind of grew up in the newspapering business. And then Dad went into politics with Griswold and became was appointed director of agriculture in the state of Nebraska. So we went to Lincoln when I was about 10. And I think Dad was in that a couple years, and then he was appointed to the Board of Control, which is 3 people, I think, served on that board, and they're in charge of all this. We had 17 institutions in Nebraska at that time.
Oh, is that what that
And
is?
so that, my dad always had to visit those. Of course, my brother and I always got taken along, because he said, you need to see how the other half of the world lives. We don't all live like the rest of it. He said, it'll be good. And I've never forgotten those experiences. I went to mental institutions and penal complexes, and you name it, I saw them all. Hospitals. So it was a very good experience. And Dad was down, I think they were down there 7 years, and then Dad had had a manager for the paper, and he got out of politics, and they came back, and they ran the paper again. And he said 7 years is enough. Politicking.
yeah, but, oh, your uncle was down there.
My dad's brother.
Yeah,
He was Carl Curtis's, our
Yeah.
Senator Carl Curtis. He was his secretary for as long as he lived.
oh, buddy.
Yeah, he went in with Curtis when he became a senator, and they,
What was his name?
Milton was Dad's brother. He was here early in Arapahoe. The boys came, Dad was probably 10, 12, and Uncle Milt was a little bit older. He served in different capacities here. He was postmaster here in Arapahoe. And then he, I think, was an editor, worked on the paper at Minden, or Clay Center. And then from there he went on with Curtis and went into being his secretary in Washington. And that's where he was when he passed away. Let's see, the other side, the Hasty family, I should tell you, to be fair to my mother.
Yes, I would say, because
Tell us.
Arapahoe, 1871.
Okay,
Okay, there wasn't any town here. My dad Granddad was 23 years old, and he rode in on horseback, which would have been from Plum Creek. If you've been up to Lexington and seen the Plum Creek site, you know the trail that he came down. And there's a trail mapped in the museum, isn't there, of that Clarence
Yes, there's
Benjamin
one.
did a lot of-
The library also.
did research on that for us. Anyway, that's how he got here. And he fell in love with the place. He just thought this was the most beautiful valley. And there wasn't anything here, but there were some guys down in the bottom, down here, driving stakes in the ground. And so he asked them, he said, who they were. And they told him they were soldiers, they were men, belonged to a group out of Plattsmouth of Murphy. And he's our founder. And this was his idea, and they told him they were laying out these stakes for the town of, it was to be called Arapahoe. And so he decided he'd stay. So he went up here. There's 2 creeks in Arapahoe. There's Elk Creek on this side and Muddy Creek over here. So we get straight where we are. Well, he went up here on the Elk Creek, right up here on the northeast corner of town. Everybody knows it now as Doc Moline's property, but it's on the top of the hill, just north of, let's see, who lives up there, do we know?
Heinrich.
Yeah, Hendricks. They have a house built out there on, would have been Granddad's property. And he staked a claim in the snow, if you can believe that, and he thought he was on flat ground. And when the spring came, he was on hill. That much snow. So he came in 1871, I think, and there were a lot of people followed after that. First of all, he built himself a dugout here on Elk Creek. Mother always said you could see the remains of it when she was a kid. And he hadn't any more gotten that dugout finished for the winter. From over the hill came a wagon with a Professor D. Almond and 9 children in this wagon. And they got to visiting and everything, and they kind of stopped here, and he asked, real interested in each other and why they were there. And Professor Dalman was talking about going on west, and Granddad told him, you know, it's getting pretty close to winter, you better think about spending the winter here. And so he offered his dugout, which he just finished, to the Dialmans, and those 9, 10 people, 12, whatever there were,
Oh, gosh.
stayed in that dugout that first winter, and Granddad went down to Burton's Bend, which is her plan, and went down there and batched, which Burton's Bend was south of Holbrook, and it was a man's homestead, but he also had kind of a little building fixed up with supplies for people. And outside of Plum Creek, there wasn't any place to get any other kind of foodstuffs or anything here in the early days. So Granddad was here real early. Fortunately, he was a man who had a little education. Came from Maine, graduated from what they call Limerick Academy, which would have been, I suppose, somewhere beyond high school, not something like college. Anyway, he had apparently had quite a bit of know-how on engineering and construction and on surveying. And so he had no problem finding something to do here as the town developed, you know. And there's our book, Early Arapahoe, that tells a lot of the stories about Min Hasty. And he came here at 23, I think, and married about 3 or 4 years later to into the Atkinson family, and they had about 6 or 7 kids. And my mother was in the second marriage. The first mother passed away, and then he married my grandmother. And I'm not sure how they met.
You want
Yeah, there's a copy of Early Arapahoe, which is
Okay.
written by John Stevens, and it's probably one of the best histories. And he acknowledges in there that everything's not gospel, but it's the stories as repeated to him.
What nationality were your grandparents? Hasties.
Hasties, well, I would guess Scotch-Irish is what they always said, but they were English, because my dad's family were Scotch-Irish, and mother's family would have to be English.
Okay.
My mother's mother was born in England. And, but the Hasties, she was an otter and came to, and how my granddad ever met her, I don't know. She was from Ohio.
Oh.
I think maybe came out here to visit someone, and anyway, she met him and stayed. And there were just an issue of 2 girls, my mother and another one. So I never had any first cousins, either side of my family, because they were all second marriages, and there wasn't my dad and his brother on one side, and the other my mother and her sister, and no kids. So, but it's been very interesting to see what they did. Granddad did several things of note. He dreamed of irrigating in this valley before anybody ever thought about it, of taking water from Medicine Creek at Cambridge. And this book tells all about that, which he eventually did. And he even brought water. He infers in there, he said, water doesn't flow that way, but he made it do that. He brought it down out to that homestead, then made the water flow west, guys, and down into town and watered stuff at the park.
Oh, my gosh.
And the people, I love that story in there. It says he built a wooden flume and put it together, and the people just laughed. It was the butt of all the jokes, because when you looked at it, you could see holes where the boards fit together. There wasn't any caulking or anything in there. But he knew once he started running water in there, it would swell, which it did, and it shut it off except for a few drips, and ran water that way. And he built one of the first bridges across the Republican. By that time, there was a railroad in here, and they brought in a ordered at the city to get a pile driver. And but he knew about that type of construction. He helped with the grist mill down here, one of the first ones they had, and a mill race, and how to use water to make power, which was pretty darned important. And a lot of interesting things I've dug up. He
Did he build that canal from the river that went up and the water went back in?
that might have been his, I'm not sure.
Was it? I wondered.
Yeah, I would believe maybe you're right there. I know he liked to do that kind of stuff. I never knew my grandfather. He died 7 years before I was born. He was a great big man, well over 6 foot tall, and was diabetic in the days before insulin. And in fact, he had lost a leg. Well, we didn't have any prosthetic devices or anything, so he built himself a 3-legged stool with a strap, and Mother said he hooked that around his waist and that on his leg, and that's how he got around the farmyard.
Oh, gosh.
Was that stool. And he built an 8-sided house, sat up here on the hill just north of Arapahoe, and was a landmark. I'm very sorry they ever tore it down. Had a glass cupola on top, and big enough for 2 or 3 people could get up in there with the glass all the way around, look up and down the valley. And they asked him why he built an 8-sided house. And he said, well, that wasn't too hard to figure. That was the only dimension lumber he could buy at the time. And the fellow that tore it down told me, Hank Muck, you remember him?
Yes.
He told Mother, he said, if I'd have known what he built that out of, he said, I'd have never tried to take it down, because it would. The barn my granddad built, now I don't know how many years that's been, is still
there.
standing. Yeah. So you know that house would still be there. But the guy's wife didn't like it, so she had him tear it down.
Oh, who tore it down? What?
Hank Muck.
You did?
Yeah, Mildred
Oh,
didn't
gosh.
like it.
And they moved,
Oh, gosh.
moved the house from the Heman homestead, which was Hank's mother's
Is
side
that
of the
where that
family.
house came from?
Mhm.
Okay.
North
And
of
where was
Holbrook.
that?
Mm-hmm.
North of Holbrook.
Oh.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Mary Mock told me that was definitely where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that east land of Muck's? Where
No,
Warner's going now?
no, it was further north than that.
Or what
Ed
is it?
Mucks lived a little ways north, but this was further north.
Okay,
More up towards St. Matthew, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
all right.
I did research for a lady in Lexington to begin with, and it turned out that Vic Polston's mother
Oh.
was also a Heman.
Oh, really?
Oh, good night.
So,
Small world.
yeah. So when you start digging, you find lots of things.
Good.
Good night.
Cathy, you didn't tell about your marriage and your daughters.
Oh,
But
sorry.
before you do that,
Yeah.
they had a street or subdivision of Arapahoe that's called Hasties.
Mm-hmm.
They do?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess I've
Named
run
after
across
my
that one,
Grandpa.
probably.
Yeah,
His claim was from the top of that hill all the way to the tennis courts.
well, that's probably where, it's over in that area
Yeah,
someplace, isn't
well-
it? Just
I have a
the,
map I didn't think to bring.
I didn't either.
Hasties subdivision.
Okay, well, that's probably what it was then.
Mhm.
Because there were Hasties lived all up and down that road. Must have been
Okay, I
5 or
wanted to
6
mention
houses.
that.
Yeah, oh yeah, they were, a bunch of them. He brought his parents and his brothers and sisters, and they all, not all of them, but a lot of them came from Maine and came out here.
The thing before you started, that DeAlmond thing,
Mm-hmm.
my gosh. I never knew that many, but DeAlmonds were around here.
They didn't all stay here, and how many of them there were after that, I don't know, but I think 3 of them were already out of school, of
Oh.
those 3. So those 3 went on, one of whom, I can tell you, went to Garden City, Kansas, because there's a street down there named DeAlmond Street.
Oh,
And I think that might have been Benoit, I think was his name, is that right? Huh? That sound
I
right?
think so.
oh,
But,
God.
so they were well-educated people. The professor was, and he helped with schooling and stuff. My granddad taught for a while here. And they, at first they had just somebody borrowed somebody's one-room cabin. And that was private. I mean, I think those people must have paid a little bit for the teacher
Yeah.
to do in those days, you know, for their kids to get a little education, until they got this town organized and got a school district going.
Arapahoe School.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a lot of different stories. You have to talk to each family and see how they got their education. And at least what I've been able to figure out there, you know, there were a lot of different people trying to get the kids educated. And
Professor Diana was also the county superintendent in Furnace County.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Oh, is that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
yeah, he was.
He was the
Yeah.
father of Alfred and,
Well,
What's the one that worked for the telephone company?
Alfred was the
Plumber.
plumber.
Yeah, well, what was his brother's
You would ask.
name? Lived right down there where Squirt's place is.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I can't remember his name
it's
either.
probably in this book.
Well, I saw him
I knew
every
somebody.
day for years.
Yeah,
But I can't tell you.
well,
is that who your dad threw the hammer at?
Well, that was Al.
that was Alf, had the plumbing shop where you
Yeah.
base place of business.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember him in that building real well. And the other place that was there, that station that they tore down, that belonged
Yeah.
to,
Crops.
yeah, Crops right across the street
Yeah.
there. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I remember that, you do too, I know. Oh, I was gonna tell you one thing interesting I'd found that I thought, that Granddad told, was that in the early days before we had any need for roads or streets, or roads in and out of Arapahoe, they weren't east and west like they are here. The trail came from Plum Creek, but if you wanted to go east, I've been trying to run this down. If you wanted to go east, Granddad said there was only an Indian trail, and you had to head off. Well, you couldn't cross Elk Creek. You had to go, Turkey Creek. You had to go all the way north to where Vaughn and Nick Dawson lived out there. And there's an actual ford there, and that's how you could get across and head into that trail. And that trail it was an old Indian trail that they followed. And that's how they used to go. And Granddad took a body, they had a tragic accident of a young boy killed. And his folks wanted his body returned to their family plot in Iowa. So they asked Granddad if he would take him to the railhead, which was at Lowell, I believe, which is over there by Hartwell, or,
Yeah.
this side of Hastings somewhere.
Yeah.
Is that where Lowell is? I'm sure
I
I've
think
looked
so.
it up.
No, it isn't.
And so it was kind of a long wagon ride, but he agreed to do that. And took his body there. He met the train. But he said he had quite a job getting him there because they didn't embalm in those days. And it was a time getting there. And at night he had to stand guard because he said the wolves were so bad.
Oh my
So-
gosh.
So they could smell that body. And so he kind of had to stand guard then. But he made it in good time. And then, so that was another story, you know. And he was a hunter and a trapper, I found out Granddad did. And he liked to go up on the Dismal, up here in the
Oh.
Sandhills.
Oh my gosh.
Was his favorite place to hunt and fish. And his first winter, this one where he built this cave thing, he went up there and did hunting and trapping. Did well, got his furs and stuff all stashed away and hidden away to go back and get him in the spring. The Indians had found him, and so he didn't have anything for his whole winter's work up there.
Oh,
Kathy, didn't he build the glass thing on top of the house to watch for Indians?
That's what my cousin always said. Well, but that was their nephew, mother's half-brother, son, and they used to come down and have Sunday dinner, and he said the kids had all piled in up there. And that was their thing for the day, was to watch for Indians up and down. They had good imaginations, I think. And, but I think maybe that trail, and I was talking to Mick Dawson, and I said, I wonder if Vaughn ever said anything about it. And she told me that a couple of the boys Vaughn had told about that, so I'm gonna ask if across there they remember any trails heading that way. Maybe I can kind of trace the way that thing went. And originally, now if you live here in Arapahoe, you know that Main Street is not Main Street, north and south. Main Street is down north of the railroad,
East and west.
and it runs east and west,
It's
because
north of Crawford Station
Yeah.
between.
they laid this out that way, and they thought the town would develop that way. And, because they used to come into town from what's now the dump road down there.
Yeah.
And so that's why Main Street got laid out that way. I remember one early thing, there was people by the name of Early, do you remember it? And I think this guy was a blacksmith early on here. And he had a pretty good sized building for blacksmithing, and it would have been where that transformer is, west of Crawford's.
Yeah.
On that corner. A pretty good sized building in there, and they called it the Early Building after this guy sold out his business and everything. And Gertrude Snyder told me that when she was young, first married, they used to have silent films. It was before we had a movie house, and had silent films, and they would go to that Early's shop, that building,
Yeah.
and she'd play the piano for the silent movies
Oh, yeah. Oh, well.
and everything. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing to.
Kathy, tell them about your grandfather taking what he took for medicine when he would have a diabetic attack.
Oh, yeah, Mother said he had spells, what he called a spell. And he'd come in the house and he'd say, "Daughter, get up there and get my bottle." And she said she'd have to get up, it's tall ceilings, and they had a poison cupboard clear up against the ceiling. And she got this bottle down for him, and she said he'd take a tumbler, large tumbler, well over 12 ounces of water. And he would take 1 drop of strychnine and put that in that tumbler of water.
Oh,
And
God.
she'd put it back. And she said he would drink that down continuously. He never stopped. He just drank down that whole thing of water. And then she said he'd go to bed for 3 days. They would see him. He never ate, never was awake, never saw him. And they'd get up the next day and ready to go, and he was okay. Dosed himself that way for years.
Oh, my gosh.
There were a lot of doctors who used to be around here in the early days who knew about Granddad. But of course, strychnine's used in a lot of medications today. But at that time, they always said 1 drop will kill a horse. And so I always kind of laughed at that story. And Mother said that's what he did.
true.
Huh?
That's true.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But
Mother can
strychnine
testify
makes
to
you
that.
bleed, doesn't it?
Pardon?
Strychnine makes you bleed, doesn't it?
I would think so. If it were too much, you would bleed internally. Yeah, I think you're right. And so anyway, I don't know, that's what he used to do. He did a lot of different things. Every once in
How he ever found out about doing that?
I don't know.
Somebody must have told him or something.
Old Indian remedy maybe. He used to visit with the Indians. He always told Mother.
All right.
And the Indians were never here except that they passed through on this Indian trail, going to and from hunting. And there is an interesting story of his that he told about one day this Indian showed up in town, and everybody was kind of excited and called Granddad to come down and talk with this Indian that was there. And Granddad was visiting with him a little bit because he kind of knew their sign language or whatever, and figured out how to talk with them a little. And he said he looked down, and here on the thong on this Indian's neck was a piece of a surveyor's instrument, part of an alidade, which is used in surveying land. And he recognized it, and he asked the fella, he said, where did you get this? Well, it was brass. And
Yeah.
he thought it was attractive, I suppose, and he'd hung it on a thong. And the fellow told him that he'd found it down on the Sapa, which is down by Beaver and everything. Well, the story is this: they had an early surveying party that disappeared.
Oh, yeah.
But through this information, then they were able to send a party down there, and they found that had been massacred by the Indians. And this guy wasn't in on it. That had been years before, but he had found that down in the gully. And
I think it was over closer to Hollinger and Precept.
was it?
Some
Okay,
in that area.
okay. I know it was down there somewhere.
What year was that?
Oh,
I
really?
don't know. No, early on, I don't remember.
And what tribe were they from, those Indians?
Oh, I don't know. The Granddad ever said anything about what tribe of Indians were here. I'm sure that we probably had some Pawnee, maybe Cheyenne might have gone through, but
They always told the story that
Kiowas
the
maybe.
Arapahoe Indians camped out on the bluffs south of town.
Mhm.
And then another story was that when they were laying out to town, there was an Indian that told some of them that the flood, the water had never gotten up this far. Well, the 35 flood, it got to just south of the railroad tracks,
Mhm.
but not up into the town.
Mhm. Yeah, Granddad said the Indian stories were that, and it's true, we know that, but that this was once the bottom of a river, or a big river that ran from bluff to bluff. The water, and you can find seashells along the tops of the bluffs, so you know the water. Prehistorically, the water was here, you know, I suppose after the glacier and all that stuff in Nebraska. And so it's been an interesting place, I think. Lots of history. Lelia and I keep finding lots of good stuff.
Guys, you're talking about those out there on the bluffs, no Harry Brett, or, not Harry Brett, but Brett, he always was up there and he'd walk that dadgum thing. And I remember to take his kids to go up there. We always done some Indian stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because
There was an old, do you remember they had a place called Blackwood Cave, and about the second or third indentation back in those bluffs, and we used to go out there and scare each other. You go get in there. There's an old cellar or cave left and something, you know, and none of the kids ever wanted to go in. In the early 30s, why Ruth Tower organized, we didn't have Girl Scouts or anything like that, but she organized a little bunch of girls, and we'd go down there and hike down there. And made our own knapsacks and took little hiking trips and went, our lunches, and went down there to play and see what was going on.
Water.
Old WPA project.
guy, oh, yeah.
Well, Kathy, you still haven't told about your girls.
Oh, sorry. Well, we lived in Lincoln, so I finished, my folks came back my senior year of high school. And I had my senior year all planned. I wasn't interested in coming, even though I would have liked to come here. I had a lot of friends in Arapahoe. But I decided not to come out, and my aunt, my uncle's wife, came and kept house for me while Mother and Dad came back here and batched here in Arapahoe. And I finished my senior year in Lincoln, then went on to the university. And after university, I met and married a man from Colorado, an engineer by the name of Hanson, and he was from Brush, Colorado. And we worked for a seismic crew. He was we explored for oil. So the first, I don't know. He only lived 6 years. He had quite a very serious heart ailment left from the time he was a kid. But he lived a very good life with the things that he had. He had a murmur, you'd appreciate that, loud enough you could hear as we were sitting here. And, he passed away, and he was a graduate of the Colorado School of Mines. But we moved a lot. It was a really wonderful experience. Even the kids were good movers. Janie, the oldest one, lived,
Just that right here.
I counted them up in her baby
Thank
book.
you.
Cream or sugar?
Not
Thank
too
you.
long ago. She lived 14 different places her first 2 years. So, you know, we moved a lot.
Oh my
14.
gosh.
Well, how old was he when he died then?
Well, he was just 38. Mhm. So, then I'd come home and visit. Started teaching, went back to school, brushed up a little bit, and started teaching school at Fort Morgan, Colorado. And I'd come home to visit the folks. And while I was here, I'd never met this man I'm married to now, Mel Weber. I never knew him when we were kids because I'm 2 years older than he is. And you know, you'd never looked at the
Yeah.
young kids. You were always looking at somebody who's a little older. And girls do that. And so I met him through mutual friends here, and decided I'd live. My mother said, "Why would you want to move to a farm?" And I said, "Well, I think it'd be pretty nice."
Well, you've made a good adjustment to the farm.
Oh, I've enjoyed living in the country, still do. Wonderful place.
Great.
I never grew up there, but and I'm probably not a very good farmer's wife, but I've enjoyed living there.
But
And so I taught school here after Mel and I were married, I don't know, a year or two, I think. And then I decided I better get to work. So first I went up and I applied and I was welfare director for Gosper County for the year that we all signed up for Medicare. So I had to do the whole caseload in the 10 or 11 months that I was there. But when summer rolled around, I realized that it wasn't a very good thing with kids because I had no place to do for babysitter. So I decided I'd go back to teaching school. So I applied down here. Then I taught here, 32 years with what I had in Colorado.
Who was the guy who was hanging from the windmill?
Hmm? Yeah. Yeah, one day I went to work. It was real foggy going to Elwood. I was sure glad it was foggy. Some fella had committed suicide. He was there, but everybody was talking about it when I got to work, and I said, I didn't see him. Thank goodness.
That was
I'd have
up
been
there in the bottom of
upset.
that canyon, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, right, that windmill's still there.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Well, I've always heard a story about a lady and a man committed suicide on our school steps. Is that a true story?
That's right.
Who was that? And tell me about it. I don't
Okay.
know.
Well, his name was James Bloodworth, I believe. And I can't remember her name. She was Ruth Murray's half-sister.
Oh,
Mr. Murray, I don't know whether he was married 2 or 3 times, but anyway, this girl was a half-sister. And she's buried up there too. Well, he was 20-some years old and she was like 15. And the families were very upset. They were very enamored with each other. And they'd done everything they could think of to try to break them up and separate the two. And so then, yes, the janitor went to school one morning and he had killed her and then killed himself right there in the doorway of the school.
But they'd each written a note, so it was a suicide pact,
Mm-hmm.
and
I'll bet that turned the town on end, didn't it?
I suppose,
Well, I'm sure
I
it
don't
did.
remember. I'm
No,
sure.
no, that was early.
Mhm.
Oh, was it?
Mm-hmm. And I've forgotten, I did know the date. 1900 from,
Gosh, how many, that family, that Murray family, there was quite a family, a sizable family then, wasn't it?
no, of Murray's, and I don't know about that. The only ones I ever knew were Ruth and Russell.
Okay, that's
Just the
all I
boy
ever
and
knew.
girl, yeah. And if they were by other marriages, I never knew any of those people.
Okay.
But I understood they had now, where that's the one where Dave and Chris live. The Murray Ranch is right on that flat out north of their house, because there's foundation still there. And then they always told the joke about old man Murray, that said that every time the tax collector would come, he'd move to do taxes, why he'd move the herd to Colorado. And then when the taxes came due out there, he moved them back to Nebraska. That's how we avoided being taxed on his cattle herds. I always thought that was a pretty good story.
Well, was it on the Murray place that 2 boys, Den boy, one's name was Den,
That sounds right.
the other, and they were digging a cave in the bank, and it caved in and
Killed them both. Yeah.
Right out here?
Um,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't remember who the second one was, but one of them I remember the last name was Den, D-E-N.
Well, see, that old building was out there where they usually use it for cards and parties and stuff. It's still, well, all the
Foundation.
foundation and stuff like that is still there.
I see.
I was thinking about something about that and I lost the train of thought. Well, it'll come to me. There, I was trying to think about what else on that creek, but I don't know. A lot of people don't know about the corner where the senior center is now. Back in 1898, I think, they built a beautiful hotel there. And there's a picture of it we found, and we put it down at the senior center for everybody to see there, what used to stand there. And it was the showplace of southwest Nebraska for a while, because it had accommodations, and by that time the trains were going through, and they even had a taxi service with horses, with a free ride to transport your luggage and everything up to the hotel from down the train station. Which it was not where the original station was here in off Nebraska Avenue, but it was further west, I guess. So it was quite a trip to get down to the.
Was it the Parkside Hotel? Was that-
No,
It was the Clute Hotel.
yeah, Clute. Clutes were an early family here, and they did real well. They built that hotel, and then right across the street where the memorial is now, that's where the Clute grocery was. And it faced south, and it burned. And then I think on further, that I haven't researched that much, but I believe their livery was just down the street a little further east from there. There were 2 or 3 liveries, I think, here in the town.
Well, Shirley McCoy, Shirley Burton, her grandfather was the one who had the cabin at Holbrook, Burton's Bend,
Bend.
the Burton's cabin that you mentioned.
Uh-huh.
And then he had a livery that was east
That might-
on that street. And I think it was called DeHaas Hotel.
Yeah.
The Horse Hotel, DeHaas Hotel.
That's pretty good.
Gosh, that Clute, you tell me about that Clute, the only thing I remember was an old Clute from Holbrook.
Well, he was related.
That was Bert.
There were quite a family of them.
Was there quite a few? That's the last one that I ever knew,
Yeah, I never knew any of the Clutes were here. I've just ran across it in
just
research.
that one.
I
That was
think there
Bert-
was a
Bert
relative
Clute.
still alive over
Bert.
at Grand
Yeah.
Island.
Uh-huh.
I knew him pretty well.
Did ya?
Yeah.
Okay.
He lived right by my wife's grandfolks, Lucky's. They're at Holbrook. He lived right next door north.
Well, they did real well.
Yeah.
The time that they were here in Arapahoe had made good money and a good business. Anything I've ever read or heard about him anyway.
He's supposed to be the one that started pheasant population in Furnace County.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Now that's interesting. I'd never heard that one before.
Yeah, that's what he always claimed. Ask him, I bet that's right.
That's what I've always told, yeah.
Well, that's great. That's good to know. I've often wondered how they got started here.
Well, I think around the middle 30s, I think I found an article in the paper once about them importing pheasants here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They called them ringnecks.
Yeah.
Back then.
Ringnecks. Mhm.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Well, keep on going, you're doing all right.
Oh,
You've been
no.
through almost
No,
mine.
no, you tell us what you know.
You tell him.
I just bought these things, so we're gonna eat them.
Oh my gosh.
You
Okay,
got it.
thank you.
Yeah.
Help yourself.
You want one, don't you? Did you eat one, something?
You guys do it.
No, you
Yeah,
go right
I've been
ahead.
here too many times.
Oh.
Well, I have something
Sheriff?
I
Cut it in half.
when I'm researching in the old Arapahoe papers, I always have a tablet and I write down anything related to the Thomases in one, anything related to the McCoys in one, and another one on the Haussler and
Yeah,
Warner side, all those. And so I got out my, I thought I'd find where Uncle Harold sold radios. I could not find it. I know someplace I have it. But it was Atwater Kent's, I believe, radio. And I know my folks bought one from him.
Yeah.
But in January 19th, 1928 edition, I found an item. Chet Lumley, the local Chevrolet dealer, reports the sale of 2 of the bigger and better coaches to Kenneth Bratt and to Harold Faw.
oh my gosh.
And January 26th says of 28, a want ad had have the carbon burn from your motor, 50 cents per cylinder. Harold Faw.
Oh my gosh.
I marked some more. On February February 2nd of 28, there was a large advertisement, a box advertisement, said the Crosley Icy Ball is a new and revolutionary refrigeration appliance. It will keep your ice box cold, make ice, and freeze desserts. It will last a lifetime without further expense. See this new product on display at our garage, Harold Fall, Arapahoe, Nebraska.
Oh my
What's the,
God.
what's the guy over at Beaver City?
Strayer.
Strayer? I'll bet that's where they got started, because about then's when they kinda quit barters.
Oh, I didn't realize he and Strayer were,
Mhm.
They started the garage together,
oh, I see.
Here.
Okay. I didn't realize
and they
that.
decided that there wasn't enough for two families.
Mhm.
Well, Walt did that, Walt and Strayer started that,
Mhm.
and then decided there wasn't enough for two families, so Strayer moved to Beaver City then. That's what happened,
And the refrigerator business went with him.
yes.
I see.
That's what
He's
happened.
always specialized in refrigerators even
I
now.
see.
Mhm. Well, February 16th, 1928, there was a one ad, and it says, mashed fender straightened and repaired at Foz Garage. I just marked.
Oh, my gosh.
And in April 19th of 28, there was a large advertisement, the 10 reasons why we sell Miller tires. Cooperative Oil Company, Harold Fall, manager.
Oh, God. My gosh. Yeah.
And May 10th of 28, Harold Fall and Orrin Horton went to McCook Wednesday and returned the same evening
Thank
with
you,
two Ellis Chalmers tractors, the agency for which is held by Foz Garage.
Oh, God.
Did you know that?
No.
Early.
So
I didn't know.
he had
his
a lot of,
fingers in
had his hand in a
everything,
lot of
didn't he?
things to
Oh, my
make a little
God.
extra money. I thought there was another one.
That's a good thing he did, because he didn't have, the little cash receipts that I ever looked at, there wasn't very much.
And one ad, bargain, and this was September 13th of 28. Bargain, 1923 Buick sedan, four-door, balloon tires, A1 shape, Foz Garage.
Oh.
Anyway,
Great.
I just found some of those things, and I found your folks' little wedding write-up. They were told people they were going to the county fair, but they went to Norton and got married.
Oh, God.
That's pretty
Okay.
good.
And Uncle Guy and Aunt Irene Bly also,
Will and Liz, huh?
no, but they were married earlier that year
Oh,
at Norton, according to the paper. And Aunt Mary and Uncle Carl were married, Forneys were married in Norton, so.
oh.
I have a question. Why did so many people went to Norton? Why did they go to Kansas to get married?
Didn't have to wait.
Well, I wonder if that was it. We had a waiting period or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just thought you might, actually, when I got this out, I was looking for the item about the radios because you didn't seem to know
I
that.
never heard anything about that before,
And
no.
I'm sure it was Atwater Kent's, that's what ours was, and it was a battery. They had electric and battery, but we didn't have electricity out on the farm, so we had a battery.
When did you get electricity?
Oh, they didn't have electricity anytime when they lived out where I remember.
1940s or?
Well, they moved in '39 down here south of the tracks, and they had some
The 40s
some
sometime.
hang-down bulbs in the house there.
Them was light plants that, either they had a wind charger that run them, which was a 32 volt,
Yeah,
or a light plant generator that produced electricity back then. Electricity never come into the area here until it was about, some areas it hit in 47, most of it was in 48, 49, and 50, when REA come through this country.
well, Uncle Guy and Aunt Irene had a Delco plant, I know, and that
Yeah.
was the battery, the
Yep.
glass
Oh.
things that held the batteries.
Yeah. It could have either been 110 or 32 volt.
So they had some electricity in their house.
What's that thing down there, that little glass thing? Is that something that was a farm, what is that?
This?
Is that a glass, just a glass jug, or is that a,
I have no idea.
okay.
All I have at my house in the basement, I remember now, is an old battery
I got a
jar, and
Snoop.
I know what it was for now.
I wondered what that was.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Where did you find that?
I don't even know that.
Oh,
I've seen them on sales, but I don't know.
They, I never did know where they come
Glacier,
from.
5.
And what were they used for? That's what I wanna know.
I don't
I
know.
don't know, maybe that's what you put your hooch in when you.
Well, I'm
when
wondering
you-
if it wasn't a
It
good
seemed like,
line job.
it was always, you'd see them full of something at a drugstore, that the
I-
druggist used.
They prefer to have dark stuff for
Yeah.
wine or beer or anything though,
I see.
instead of clear glass. They use.
So I think that's what it was something that they used at the drugstores that got their supplies in for,
Mhm.
like medication.
Says max and net 5 gallons.
Mm.
So you couldn't fill it clear up.
Yeah. I guess I didn't tell about what I did as far as work. After graduation,
What year did you graduate?
1939, and there wasn't any money to go to college, and my folks moved south the tracks here. Leon started the high school, and Lisetta started the kindergarten, and I went to high school, took a post-grad course, and worked in the superintendent's office. And that next year in the fall, I went to work for Roscoe Story in the Furnace County Courthouse, the county clerk's
Oh,
office.
that's where you got all this interest and
And
knowledge.
I never thought I'd want to read those darn deeds I had to type, but it turned out to be fun. But then we moved back, Les and I moved back to a farm southwest of town, and on the Hoot Briny farm. And when we moved back to town, then I cleaned some house, I babysat and did a little of that, and then I worked for 2 years for Ralph and Jenny, and then went to work for the bank and worked for 25 years, and retired July the 1st of 1984. So I've been retired 25 years.
But Lelia,
Good.
you did clerking of sales for
Oh, yeah.
years.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
many
we
years
clerked-
did you do that?
Oh, I have no idea.
You were always there.
We clerked, Lucetta and I both clerked for my dad, but on our own, but then for the bank, I helped clerk.
Yes.
Um,
And you haven't just sat around while you retired either?
No.
Doing something?
No, but the most fun, the thing I enjoy the most in retirement is the research for genealogy and the old newspapers. I love going through them. So,
Now, what do you think of our present newspapers? Are they?
well, I
going
don't
to-
think you're gonna find much family
No.
items in it,
No.
not like these.
Mm-mm.
Mhm,
That's so disappointing.
mhm.
Aren't too many papers left that do that anymore.
Mm-mm.
The Beaver City paper,
Yeah.
the local ones, has
Comes as
more
close. Mhm.
of the family-oriented one, but I think they're having trouble keeping people doing news items.
Mhm.
And Noella Hewitt is in her 90s and she's still writing news.
Knows
Yes,
everything,
Mhm.
everything.
They have some real interesting articles in that paper though.
Oh, yes.
Some of them are really great. Gary's did a good job.
Beaver City is a
Mhm.
nice newspaper. Very nice.
Yeah,
And some of the old ones are really fun to read. They're so worded, so flowery and
Oh,
all this kind
Well-
of stuff, you know, even the obituaries were flowery.
well, Cyril
Yeah.
Walker, the things that he
Yeah.
wrote were
He was the old
absolutely
school.
a scream, I think.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, if you wrote that way today, they'd fire you.
Well, I thought it was funny when this one lady said that these two ladies motored to some town, you know. And I thought that was a funny way to say it.
That's the way they used to write
They
it.
wrote.
I was reading a history of our church the other day. There's one of the early
What
ministers.
church is that?
Episcopal church that I
Okay.
belong to. And in their early history there, they had, one of the ministers had written quite a dialogue in there. And he said it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And I don't remember, I think he said one of the prisoners had a car. And he said, we motored down to Orleans. And he said it was rather than a buggy, was what he was implying. That was quite an experience. Getting in the car. I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, we've had, the problem is that with this kind of thing, we don't have enough people who have these memories that write them down, like you're trying to realize that, and we need to try to preserve some of this. So it'd
Well,
be
the thing
nice.
that bothers me is when the elderly people are gone, the history's gone.
Sure.
Because the younger generation has no desire to realize what's happening. Until they get up middle age, 35, 40 years old, and then they start saying, oh, I just kind of wonder about that. But they forgot to ask when they was a
Too
kid.
late then.
Yes.
Or they say, I wish I remembered what Dad told me. Some of those things Dad told me.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, along the genealogy line, my husband, Lester John Haussler, came from an orphanage, and we had known that. But in 1964, we discovered that Herman and Marie, and they were very good parents, and they had two